In 2012, the United States executed 43 people. Each case is more than just a sentence. It's a story of crime, trial, and punishment. In this video, we'll go through their crimes, their trials, their last meals, final words, and the way they were executed. Welcome to Criminal Records. Gary Roland Welch, State, Oklahoma. In 1994, Gary Roland Welch, a tattoo artist and methamphetamine user, murdered 35-year-old Robert Dean Hardcastle during a drug-related dispute in Miami, Oklahoma. Welch, 37 at the time, stabbed Hardcastle multiple times with a knife, while an accomplice, Claudie Canever, attacked him with a broken beer bottle. Hardcastle suffered over 10 stab wounds, 3 of which punctured his lungs, causing him to bleed to death. Welch claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging Hardcastle had stabbed him in the arm first. However, forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony contradicted his story. The jury concluded Welch had ample opportunity to stop the assault, but chose to continue. Canever was also sentenced to death, but later had his sentence commuted to life. He died in prison in 2001. In 1996, a jury in Ottawa County found Welch guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. The verdict cited 3 aggravating factors: a prior history of violence, creating a risk to others, and the especially cruel nature of the murder. His appeals were denied at both state and federal levels, and in December 2011, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 against recommending clemency. In his final days, Welch showed no remorse. He had immersed himself in Norse mythology and corresponded with anti-death penalty activists. He told the Clemency Board, "I'm not here whining for my life. I did what I had to do." In his last meal before execution, Gary Welch requested 2 fish fillets from Long John Silver's. On January 5, 2012, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Welch was executed by lethal injection. He was 49 years old. Before the drugs were administered, fellow inmates pounded on their cell walls in solidarity. Welch acknowledged them, saying, "My brothers are here to see me off." His final words were, "I want to acknowledge that my brothers are here for me, to send me off on my journey. They already gave me my little farewell, so let's get on with it." He then shouted 4 times, "Valhalla, Odin, destroy the beast." Rodrigo Hernandez, State, Texas. In 1994, 29-year-old Rodrigo Hernandez kidnapped and murdered Susan Verstegen, a 38-year-old Frito-Lay employee in San Antonio, Texas. Verstegen was abducted from a supermarket parking lot and later found sexually assaulted and strangled, her body dumped in a trash bin behind the Prince of Peace Church. The case went cold for 8 years until 2002, when Hernandez, recently released on parole in Michigan, was forced to submit a DNA sample. It matched evidence found on Verstegen's body. He was also linked by DNA to the unsolved 1991 murder of 77-year-old Muriel Stupker in Grand Rapids, Michigan, though he was never prosecuted for that case. In 2004, a jury in Bezar County convicted Hernandez of capital murder. The prosecution presented forensic evidence and emotional testimony from Verstegen's son, who spoke about the lasting impact of her absence. Hernandez maintained his innocence throughout the trial. All appeals were denied. In 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final petition. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles also declined clemency, a decision supported by Governor Rick Perry. On January 26, 2012, Rodrigo Hernandez was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. He was 38 years old. In his last meal before execution, due to a statewide policy change in 2011, Hernandez received the same standard meal served to all inmates. Just before his death, Hernandez confessed to Texas investigators that he had killed Muriel Stopker in 1991 during a sexual encounter, claiming the gun went off accidentally. His final words were, "I want to tell everyone I love you. We are family, people of Almighty God. I'm ready. This stings, man." Edwin Hart Turner. State, Mississippi. On December 13, 1995, 22-year-old Edwin Hart Turner went on a deadly robbery spree in Carroll County, Mississippi, alongside his accomplice Paul Merle Stewart. High on alcohol and marijuana, they targeted 2 gas stations in the same night. At the Mims Turkey Village truck stop, Turner shot Eddie Brooks, a clerk, once in the chest. When Brooks couldn't open the register, Turner fired again at point-blank range into his face, killing him instantly. Minutes later, at the Mims 1 stop, Turner encountered Everett Curry, a customer pumping gas. Despite Curry's pleas, Turner shot him in the head. The total amount stolen was around $400, which Turner and Stewart split before being arrested the next day. In 1996, a Forest County jury found Turner guilty of 2 counts of capital murder and sentenced him to death, citing the aggravating factor of committing murder for financial gain. Stewart cooperated with authorities and received a life sentence. Turner's appeals raised issues about procedural errors and his long history of mental illness. Since adolescence, he had exhibited signs of severe psychiatric conditions, including multiple self-harm incidents and hospitalization. He often covered his face, even during the crimes, due to permanent injuries from a previous suicide attempt. His family history also included serious mental health disorders. Organizations like the ACLU and the American Psychiatric Association argued that executing individuals with such conditions violated the 8th Amendment. Still, Mississippi courts concluded that Turner was mentally competent and understood his actions. In 2012, the Mississippi Parole Board voted 3-2 against recommending clemency, and Governor Phil Bryant allowed the execution to proceed. A last-minute stay was briefly granted, but ultimately overturned by the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. In his last meal before being executed, Turner requested a medium-cooked porterhouse steak, fried shrimp, Texas toast, salad with Russian dressing, red Twizzlers, and sweet tea. On February 8, 2012, Edwin Hart Turner was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. He was 38 years old. He did not offer any final statement, though during the process he asked, "What are we waiting for?" Robert Bryan Waterhouse. State, Florida. On January 2, 1980, 33-year-old Robert Bryan Waterhouse left the ABC Lounge in St. Petersburg, Florida, accompanied by 29-year-old Deborah Kammerer, a single mother. The next day, her naked and severely mutilated body was found in the Tampa Bay mudflats. She had suffered multiple facial fractures, evidence of sexual assault with a blunt object, and a blood-soaked tampon had been forced into her throat. The cause of death was drowning, as her body had been left to be pulled in by the high tide. Waterhouse was no stranger to violent crime. In 1966, at age 19, he had been convicted of murdering 77-year-old Ella Mae Carter in Greenport, New York. He was paroled in 1975 after serving less than a decade. In the Kammerer case, blood, hair, and fibers found in Waterhouse's car matched those from the victim, leading to his arrest. In September 1980, a Pinellas County jury found Waterhouse guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death, citing the cruelty of the crime and his prior murder conviction as aggravating factors. In 1988, Florida's Supreme Court ordered a new sentencing due to procedural errors, but in 1990, Waterhouse was again sentenced to death after choosing not to present any mitigating evidence. Years later, controversy emerged over destroyed evidence. In 2005, defense attorneys requested DNA testing. only to learn that key biological evidence had been destroyed by authorities in 1987, allegedly by accident. In 2012, a new witness came forward, claiming Waterhouse had left the ABC lounge with 2 men, not the victim. This testimony had allegedly been dismissed back in 1980. Despite these developments, Waterhouse's final appeals were rejected by both the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. The Florida Board of Executive Clemency denied him clemency by a vote of 3-2, with Governor Rick Scott upholding the decision. Waterhouse spent his final hours with his wife, Fran, whom he had married by correspondence during his time on death row. In his last meal before being executed, Waterhouse requested pork chops, eggs, toast, cherry pie, and ice cream. On February 15, 2012, Robert Brian Waterhouse was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Rayford. He was 65 years old and had spent more than 31 years on death row, making him one of the longest-serving death row inmates ever executed in the state. Before dying, he said, "You are about to witness the execution of an innocent man." The state violated its own laws by destroying DNA evidence. Robert Henry Moorman, State, Arizona. On January 13, 1984, during a 72-hour prison furlough, 35-year-old Robert Henry Moorman murdered and dismembered his 74-year-old adoptive mother, Roberta Moorman, at the Blue Mist Motel in Florence, Arizona, just minutes from the state prison where he was serving a life sentence for kidnapping and sexually assaulting an 8-year-old girl in 1972. Moorman, adopted at age 7 after a childhood of abandonment and abuse, had a long history of psychological issues. He claimed the killing followed years of sexual abuse and financial manipulation by Roberta. After suffocating her with a pillow, he stabbed her multiple times, then meticulously cut up her body, placing the remains in trash bins and sewers. When questioned, he told locals the bags contained animal waste, but his suspicious behavior led to police intervention. Officers found blood in the room, a knife, saws, and $500 hidden in the victim's bra. In 1985, a Pinal County jury found Moorman guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was based on 3 aggravating factors: his prior life sentence, financial motives related to inheritance, and the cruel and depraved nature of the crime. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld the death sentence in 1987, rejecting an insanity defense. Over the years, Moorman's attorneys raised concerns about his mental capacity. He had been diagnosed with intellectual disability from childhood, attended special education classes, and had been institutionalized at age 13. In 2005, it was revealed that critical biological evidence had been destroyed in 1987, eliminating any chance for DNA testing. In 2011, the Ninth Circuit Court denied his habeas petition, ruling that Moorman understood the consequences of his actions. Arizona's Board of Executive Clemency denied clemency by a 3-2 vote. Governor Jan Brewer supported the decision. Moorman spent his final hours with a Catholic deacon, receiving communion and saying, "I trust in God." In his last meal before being executed, Moorman requested a double hamburger, beef burritos, Rocky Road ice cream, and 3 RC Colas. On February 29, 2012, Robert Henry Moorman was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison. He was 63 years old. Arizona used a single drug protocol for the first time, administering pentobarbital. The state failed to notify Moorman's attorneys 7 days in advance as required by their own policy. His final words were, "I hope this brings closure and you can begin to heal. I hope you can forgive me over time." George Rivas, State, Texas. On December 24, 2000, George Rivas, a 30-year-old escaped convict, led a deadly robbery at a sporting goods store in Irving, Texas. When Officer Aubrey Hawkins responded to the call, he was ambushed by Rivas and his accomplices, shot 11 times, and run over as they fled the scene. Officer Hawkins died instantly. Just 11 days earlier, Rivas had orchestrated one of the most notorious prison escapes in U.S. history. On December 13, 2000, he and 6 other inmates broke out of the maximum security Connolly unit near Kennedy, Texas. Armed and dangerous, they overpowered guards, stole weapons, and escaped in a stolen prison truck. Rivas, serving 18 concurrent sentences of 15 years to life for kidnapping and robbery, was the mastermind behind the escape. The group became known as the Texas Seven. In 2001, a Dallas County jury found Rivas guilty of capital murder under Texas law of parties, which holds all participants in a felony responsible for deaths that occur during the crime. During trial, Rivas stated, "I deserve the death penalty," a remark prosecutors argued was meant to sway the jury's opinion. Rivas filed numerous appeals, citing procedural errors and challenging the constitutionality of lethal injection. In 2011, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied his final appeal. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously, 7-0, against clemency. Governor Rick Perry upheld the decision. Rivas spent his final hours with his wife, Sherry. Since Texas abolished special last meals in 2011, Rivas received the same food as other inmates. On February 29, 2012, at 6:22 p.m., George Rivas was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. He was 41 years old. His final words were, "I love my wife. I'm ready to go. I apologize for everything that happened. I hope you find closure." Keith Stephen Thurmond, State, Texas. On September 25, 2001, 41-year-old Keith Stephen Thurmond murdered his estranged wife, Shannon M. Thurmond, and her new partner, Guy Sean Fernandez, in Magnolia, Texas. Earlier that day, he had been served a restraining order and lost custody of his 8-year-old son. Furious, he crossed the street to the mobile home where Sharon now lived with Fernandez. Wearing a black karate uniform and armed with a .45 caliber pistol and a sword, he opened fire. Sharon was shot multiple times in the yard in front of her son. Inside the house, Fernandez was shot twice in the head and struck with the pistol. Pieces of the weapon were later found near his body. Thurmond barricaded himself in his home with a rifle, but surrendered after a 2-hour standoff with police. In 2002, a Montgomery County jury convicted Thurmond of capital murder under Texas's law of parties, holding him fully responsible for the double homicide. The court considered several aggravating factors, including a documented history of domestic violence. Witnesses testified that Thurmond had previously assaulted Sharon and threatened her life. Thurmond appealed, claiming ineffective legal representation and unaddressed mental health issues, but his arguments were rejected by the courts. The U.S. Supreme Court denied a final appeal in 2012. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously voted 7-0 against clemency, a decision supported by Governor Rick Perry. Since Texas had abolished special last meals in 2011, Thurmond received the standard prison meal before his execution. On March 7, 2012, at the Huntsville unit, Keith Stephen Thurmond was executed by lethal injection. He was 52 years old. His final words were, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill my wife. Jack Leary shot my wife and her drug dealer Guy Fernandez. Go ahead, finish it, you can taste it." Robert Charles Towery, State, Arizona. On September 4, 1991, 29-year-old Robert Charles Towery murdered 68-year-old Mark Jones during a robbery at the victim's home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Jones, a generous man known for helping students and struggling acquaintances, had previously hired Towery as a mechanic. That trust would cost him his life. Towery and his accomplice, Randy Allen Barker, planned the robbery for weeks. They took a taxi to Jones's home, pretending to need help with a broken car. Once inside, Towery pulled a gun while Barker handcuffed Jones. They stole valuables, electronics, and cash, loading everything into Jones's Lincoln Continental. Then, Towery offered Jones a choice: to be tied up or sedated. When Jones chose the latter, Towery injected him with battery acid, a corrosive substance that failed to kill him. Towery then strangled Jones with plastic zip ties, tightening them twice to ensure he was dead. The body was found the next day. A security guard had reported seeing the two men abandon the stolen car, leading to their arrest. In 1992, a jury in Maricopa County found Towery guilty of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and other charges. His death sentence was based on the brutality of the crime and his prior criminal record. Barker, who testified against him, was sentenced to second-degree murder and released in 2001. On March 8, 2012, at the Florence State Prison, Robert Charles Towery was executed by lethal injection. He was 47 years old. In his final statement, he said, "I apologize to Mark's family and to my loved ones. So many times in life I turned left when I should have turned right, mistake after mistake." His last words were, "I love my family. Papa, Papa, Papa." A message for his nephew, meant to echo the sound of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Timothy Sean Stemple, State, Oklahoma. On October 24, 1996, 30-year-old Tricia Jane Ruddick Stemple was brutally murdered near Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her husband, Timothy Sean Stemple, age 30 at the time, orchestrated the killing to cash in on a $950,000 life insurance policy. The crime was premeditated, cruel, and driven by greed. Stemple, who was having an affair with Danny Wood, recruited her 16-year-old cousin, Terry Hunt, and another accomplice, Nathaniel Helm, to help carry out the murder. He promised Hunt up to $50,000 for his involvement. That night, Stemple faked a car emergency on U.S. Highway 75. Tricia was lured to the scene. Hunt struck her multiple times with a baseball bat wrapped in plastic to avoid leaving blood evidence. Then, Stemple ran over his wife with his pickup truck, breaking her skull, 17 ribs, pelvis, and vertebrae. To stage the death as a traffic accident, he drilled a hole in one of her tires. On March 15, 2012, Timothy Sean Stemple was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He declined to make a final statement when asked by Warden Randy Workman. For his last meal, he requested a thick-crust pizza and an orange soda, following Oklahoma's $15 meal limit. The lethal injection began at 6:04 p.m. Larry Matthew Puckett, State, Mississippi. On October 14, 1995, 28-year-old Rhonda Hatton Griffiths was found brutally murdered in her home in Petal, Mississippi. Larry Matthew Puckett, then 18 years old and a former groundskeeper for the family, was arrested at the scene holding Puckett claimed he had hit a deer and was asking for help. But that story unraveled when Rhonda's mother, Nancy Hatton, discovered her daughter's body inside the house. Rhonda's husband, David Griffiths, testified that Puckett tried to flee the scene. A manhunt ensued, and Puckett was captured 2 days later. Prosecutors argued that Puckett had broken into the home to steal money and was caught in the act. Puckett maintained his innocence, claiming a prior consensual sexual relationship with Rhonda, but this was never confirmed. The motive, according to the state, was financial desperation. In 1996, a jury in Harrison County convicted Puckett of capital murder, with the aggravating factor that the crime occurred during a sexual assault. The sentence was death. On March 20, 2012, Larry Matthew Puckett was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. He spent the day with his mother, siblings, and close friends. For his last meal, he requested macadamia pancakes, shrimp with grits, Dairy Queen ice cream cake, and Werther's Original Candies. When asked for final words, he remained silent and stared at the ceiling as the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. at the age of 35. William Gerald Mitchell. State, Mississippi. On November 21, 1995, William Gerald Mitchell, 45, approached Patty Milliken multiple times at the Magic Mart convenience store in Biloxi, Mississippi, where she worked as a cashier. Milliken, a 38-year-old mother of 4, stepped outside with Mitchell for a cigarette. She never returned. The next day, her body was found under the Pops Ferry Bridge. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, strangled, and run over by a vehicle. Her injuries included severe skull fractures and post-mortem mutilation. Mitchell had been released on parole just 1 year earlier, after serving 19 years of a life sentence for the 1975 murder of a family friend. Forensic evidence linked him to the crime. Tire tracks from his car matched those found at the scene, and inside his vehicle, investigators discovered Milliken's blood, hair, and even her dentures. In 1998, a Harrison County jury convicted Mitchell of capital murder, applying the aggravating circumstance that he committed the crime while serving a life sentence. The jury also cited the especially heinous and cruel nature of the murder. He was sentenced to death. On March 22, 2012, William Gerald Mitchell was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. For his last meal before being executed, Mitchell requested fried shrimp, oysters, chicken breasts, a strawberry milkshake, ranch dressing, and a Coca-Cola, all within the $15 limit. He barely touched the food and asked for a sedative. He refused to make a final statement and maintained his innocence until the end. At 6 p.m., a lethal combination of pentobarbital, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride was administered. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. at age 61. Family members of Patty Milliken, including her son, witnessed the execution. Mitchell declined to have any of his own relatives present. Jesse Joe Hernandez. State, Texas. In April 2001, Jesse Joe Hernandez, 36, was left to babysit 2 young children in a Dallas home. By the end of the day, 10-month-old Carlos Borjas was in a coma with a fractured skull and severe internal injuries. A week later, he was dead. His 4-year-old sister, also beaten, survived. Hernandez, a registered sex offender since 1995, had previously served prison time for indecency with a child and drug possession. He had violated parole terms multiple times, failing to register as required. Forensic testing found Hernandez's DNA and Carlos's blood on a pillowcase and on the child's clothing. The girl, despite her age, provided a stick figure drawing describing the attack. Under questioning, Hernandez initially denied involvement, but later admitted he might have hit the baby with a flashlight. In a written confession, he claimed he had just exploded when the children wouldn't stop crying. In July 2002, a Dallas County jury convicted Hernandez of capital murder. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including DNA, medical reports, and his partial confession. He was sentenced to death. On March 28, 2012, Jesse Joe Hernandez was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was 47 years old. His last words were, "Tell my son I love him very much. God bless everybody. Continue to walk with God. Go, Cowboys. Love y'all, man. Thank you. I can feel it, taste it. It's not bad." He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. after approximately 10 minutes. David Allen Gore. State, Florida. David Allen Gore was a serial killer known for committing 6 murders between 1981 and 1983, along with his cousin Fred Waterfield. The press dubbed them the Killer Cousins. Gore was sentenced to death, while Waterfield received a life sentence. Throughout his youth, Gore developed an obsession with firearms and women, which led to a series of horrific crimes. Gore's victims were young women who were raped and murdered. Confirmed victims include Hisang Huang Ling and her daughter Ying Hua Ling, as well as several other women. In his final moments, Gore apologized to the family of one of the victims, Mrs. Elliott, mother of Lynn Elliott, and expressed remorse for his crimes. His last statement was as follows: "I would like to say to Mr. and Mrs. Elliott that I am very sorry for my involvement in the death of their daughter. Above all, I wish my death could bring her back. I am not the same man today that I was 28 years ago. When I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, I became a new creation in Christ, and I know that God has truly forgiven me for my past sins. I am able to face them today because I know Christ lives in me." The Apostle Paul said, "To die is gain." So, I do not fear today as I truly look forward to spending eternity with Christ. Mr. and Mrs. Elliott, I have prayed for both of you, and I will pray that you find the peace that only Christ can give. Finally, I just want to say that I have had an enormous amount of regret, and I will pray for you and your family that you may forgive me. God bless you all. Gore was executed on April 12, 2012, after spending 28 years on death row. He was declared dead at 6:19 p.m. by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, French fries, and butter pecan ice cream. Mark Wayne Wiles, State, Ohio. In August 1985, 22-year-old Mark Wayne Wiles returned to a horse farm in Rootstown, Ohio, where he once worked, and brutally stabbed 15-year-old Mark Klima to death. Wiles had planned a burglary, but when he was surprised by the teenager, he stabbed him 24 times with a kitchen knife, then fled the scene with $260. The next day, Wiles fled to Savannah, Georgia. 5 days later, he turned himself in and confessed to the killing. His confession, given voluntarily and in detail, matched the crime scene. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints on the murder weapon, further tied him to the killing. In January 1986, Wiles waived his right to a jury trial. A panel of 3 judges found him guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced him to death. The sentence was based on multiple aggravating factors, including the cruelty of the murder and Wiles's prior violent record. He was assigned inmate number A195-876 on Ohio's death row. For his last meal before execution, Wiles requested pepperoni pizza with extra cheese, hot sauce, a salad with ranch dressing, Cheetos, cheesecake, strawberries, vanilla cookies, and Sprite. Mark Wayne Wiles was executed by lethal injection on April 18, 2012, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. He was 49 years old. The execution lasted about 10 minutes and was the first in Ohio after a 5-month moratorium due to legal disputes over the injection protocol. In his final words, he said, "The love and support of my family sustained me all these years. I love you. Since this must be done, I pray that my death brings solace and closure to the Klima family. Ohio should not be killing its citizens. God bless everyone we have failed." Shannon M. Johnson, State, Delaware. On September 24, 2006, 22-year-old Shannon M. Johnson ambushed and fatally shot Cameron Hamlin, a 25-year-old man who was sitting in a car with Johnson's ex-girlfriend, Lakeisha Truitt, outside her Wilmington home. Driven by jealousy, Johnson fired multiple rounds into the vehicle, killing Hamlin and wounding Truitt, who managed to escape. 6 weeks later, Johnson tracked Truitt down and shot her again, this time in the arm and chest. The gun jammed, and she survived. After the 2006 shootings, police uncovered evidence that Johnson tried to hire another inmate to kill Truitt and prevent her from testifying. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and witness intimidation. In March 2008, a jury found him guilty and unanimously recommended the death penalty. The court cited 6 aggravating circumstances, including prior violent felonies, premeditation, the cruelty of the crime, and his attempt to obstruct justice. In 2010, Johnson waived all appeals, choosing to expedite his execution. Federal attorneys challenged his mental competency, citing an IQ of 70 and signs of intellectual disability, but courts ruled he was competent to proceed. A federal judge criticized the state's process, noting that Johnson's court-appointed advocate acted more like a neutral assistant than a defense attorney. In his final hours, Johnson declined to pursue further clemency. For his last meal, he requested chicken lo mein, carrots, cake, whole wheat bread with butter and iced tea. Shannon M. Johnson was executed by lethal injection on April 20, 2012, at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. He was 28 years old. The procedure began at 2:45 a.m. and ended at 2:55 a.m. His last words were, "Loyalty is important. Without loyalty, you have nothing. Death before dishonor," followed by a statement in Arabic that was not translated. Johnson's death marked the last execution in Delaware. In 2016, the state's Supreme Court declared the death penalty unconstitutional, closing a chapter on capital punishment in Delaware's history. Thomas Arnold Kemp Jr. State, Arizona. On July 11, 1992, 43-year-old Thomas Arnold Kemp Jr. kidnapped 25-year-old college student Hector Soto Juarez from a Tucson apartment parking lot. With an accomplice, Jeffrey Logan, Kemp forced Juarez to withdraw $200 from an ATM before driving him to the remote Silver Bell mine. There, Kemp ordered Juarez to undress and shot him twice in the head. The murder was later revealed to be racially motivated. In March 1993, Kemp was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and kidnapping. At sentencing, he showed no remorse, stating, "I don't show mercy, and I'm certainly not here to beg for it." The court cited multiple aggravating factors, including extreme cruelty and future danger to society, and sentenced him to death. During his time on death row, Kemp made headlines for his racist views. At trial, he said, "If more of them ended up dead, the rest would learn to stay in Mexico where they belong." He refused to attend his clemency hearings, calling them a circus show. In his final hours, Kemp declined spiritual counsel. For his last meal, he requested a bacon cheeseburger, French fries, root beer, boysenberry pie, and strawberry ice cream. Thomas Arnold Kemp Jr. was executed by lethal injection on April 25, 2012, at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. He was pronounced dead at 10:08 a.m. at the age of 63. His final words were delivered firmly, "I regret nothing." Beunka Adams, State, Texas. On September 2, 2002, 19-year-old Beunka Adams and 18-year-old Richard Cobb entered a convenience store in Rusk, Texas, armed with a shotgun and wearing masks. After robbing the store, they kidnapped 2 employees, Nikki Dement and Candace Driver, and a customer, 24-year-old Kenneth Vandiver. The victims were forced into a Cadillac and driven to a remote field near the town of Alto. At the location, Vandiver was locked in the trunk while Dement was sexually assaulted by both men. Then, all 3 victims were forced to kneel, and each was shot at close range. Vandiver was killed by a gunshot to the head. Miraculously, Dement and Driver survived and managed to crawl to a nearby road for help. In August 2004, a Cherokee County jury found Adams guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Prosecutors presented his jailhouse confession, forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene, and the detailed accounts of the 2 surviving victims. Adams filed multiple appeals, citing ineffective legal counsel. In April 2012, A federal judge issued a temporary stay of execution, but the Fifth Circuit overturned it. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene hours before the execution. Beunka Adams was executed by lethal injection on April 26, 2012, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He was pronounced dead at 6:25 p.m. at the age of 29. There was no intervention from the governor. In his final words, Adams said, "To the victims, I'm very sorry for everything that happened. What happened that night was wrong. If I could go back, I would. I was very foolish back then. I made a lot of mistakes." He also asked his family not to hold on to hatred and spoke about how much he had changed in prison. Michael Bascum, Selsor, State, Oklahoma. On September 15, 1975, 20-year-old Michael Bascum Selsor and his accomplice, 18-year-old Richard Dodson, entered a U-Tote-M store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, armed with a shotgun. Their goal was to steal around $500. During the robbery, Selsor shot 55-year-old store manager Clayton Chandler 8 times at close range, killing him instantly. A second employee, 20-year-old Ina Louise Morris, was also shot but survived and managed to crawl to safety. Selsor and Dodson fled the state and were arrested a week later in California. In 1976, Selsor was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Dodson received 199 years for attempted murder. That same year, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Oklahoma's death penalty statute unconstitutional. As a result, Selsor's sentence was commuted to life without parole. Years later, in 1996, a federal court overturned his conviction due to ineffective defense counsel. He was retried in 1998, found guilty again, and sentenced to death based on 4 aggravating factors: a prior violent felony, posing a future danger, committing murder during a robbery, and calculated premeditation. Dodson testified against him, stating that Selsor was the one who pulled the trigger. In his last meal before execution, Selsor requested Kentucky Fried Chicken with mashed potatoes, baked beans, honey biscuits, and apple pie. Michael Bascum Selsor was executed by lethal injection on May 1, 2012, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was pronounced dead at 6:06 p.m. at the age of 57. His final words were, "My son, my sister, I love you. Until we meet again, be good. Eric, keep fighting. I'll be waiting at the gates of heaven. I hope the rest of you make it there too. I'm ready. Henry Curtis Jackson, State, Mississippi." On November 1, 1990, 26-year-old Henry Curtis Jackson Jr. entered his mother's home in Rising Sun, Mississippi, intending to steal a safe. He had already cut the phone line to prevent anyone from calling for help. Inside the home were his sister Regina Jackson and 6 children, his nieces and nephews. After asking for a cigarette, Jackson pulled a knife and launched a brutal attack. He fatally stabbed 4 children: Shantarica, 2, Dominique, 5, Antonio, 3, and Andrew, 2. Regina and 11-year-old Sarah were also stabbed but survived, despite suffering life-threatening injuries. Forensic reports describe the wounds as extremely violent, severing arteries and spinal cords. Jackson fled but was captured days later in West Point, Mississippi. During interrogation, he confessed. In 1991, Jackson was convicted of 4 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, and 1 count of armed robbery. The prosecution presented his confession, testimony from the survivors, and extensive forensic evidence. The jury found 6 aggravating factors, including the cruelty of the crime and Jackson's danger to others. He was sentenced to death. In 2012, Regina Jackson and Glenda Cuyoro, the mothers of the murdered children, publicly forgave their brother and asked for clemency. Governor Phil Bryant denied the request, stating there was no compelling reason to stop the execution. Jackson did not request a last meal. He refused a sedative and declined to make a final statement, saying only, "No, I don't want to." Henry Curtis Jackson Jr. was executed by lethal injection on June 5, 2012, at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. at the age of 47. Richard Albert Leavitt. State: Idaho. On July 17, 1984, 25-year-old Richard Albert Leavitt broke into the home of 31-year-old Danette Elge in Blackfoot, Idaho. Elge had reported an attempted break-in 2 days earlier and named Leavitt as a suspect. While she slept, Leavitt stabbed her 15 times with a knife. Her injuries were severe: a stab through her right eye into the brain, deep wounds to her heart and lungs, and mutilation involving the removal of her genital and anal organs. The attack ruptured her waterbed, leaving her body submerged in stagnant water until it was found 3 days later. On July 21st, Leavitt accompanied police and Elge's parents to the home, where the decomposed body was discovered. His blood was found in the bedroom. He claimed it was from a recent nosebleed. Fresh cuts on his hands were treated at a hospital soon after the crime. His ex-wife testified that Leavitt was obsessed with mutilation and had dissected animal reproductive organs before. In 1985, Leavitt was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for exceptional depravity. The Idaho Supreme Court overturned the sentence in 1989 due to errors in considering mitigating factors. In his last meal, Leavitt requested baked chicken, French fries, and milk. He declined to make a final statement, though witnesses said he muttered, "I'm not here for this," during medical preparations. Richard Albert Leavitt was executed by lethal injection on June 12, 2012, at the Idaho State Correctional Center. He was pronounced dead at 10:25 a.m. at the age of 53. Jan Michael Brawner. State: Mississippi. On April 25, 2001, 24-year-old Jan Michael Brawner entered the home of his ex-wife's family in Tate County, Mississippi. Armed with a .22 caliber pistol and a 7mm rifle, he murdered his ex-wife Barbara Brawner, his 3-year-old daughter Paige, and his former in-laws Carl and Jane Kraft. Barbara had divorced Brawner a month earlier and moved in with her parents. Facing financial struggles and estranged from his daughter, Brawner planned to rob Carl Kraft. Instead, the night turned into a massacre. He shot Jane first, then Barbara, and finally Paige, who cried out, "Daddy, you hurt me," before dying. When Carl returned home from work, Brawner ambushed and killed him too. He stole $300, food stamps, and Jane's wedding ring, which he later used to propose to his girlfriend. In April 2002, Brawner was convicted on 4 counts of capital murder. Jurors took just 90 minutes to recommend the death penalty, citing extreme cruelty and future danger. The prosecution presented his recorded confession, forensic evidence, and testimony from his girlfriend June Filyaw. In 2012, the Mississippi Supreme Court split 4-4 on his final appeal, with 1 justice recused. Brawner argued the tie should halt his execution, but the courts disagreed. Governor Phil Bryant denied clemency. In his last meal before execution, Brawner requested 2 DiGiorno pizzas, chicken parmesan and meat trio, salad with ranch dressing, Tabasco sauce, sweet iced tea, and Breyer's peanut butter ice cream. He declined a shower but accepted a sedative. On June 12, 2012, at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Brawner was executed by lethal injection. He offered final words, "I want to apologize to the victim's family. I can't change what I've done. Maybe this will bring you some peace." He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. at age 34. Gary Carl Simmons. State: Mississippi. On August 11, 1996, 33-year-old Gary Carl Simmons lured Jeffrey Wolf and his girlfriend, Charlene Leeser, to his home in Moss Point, Mississippi, under the pretense of settling a drug debt. Instead, the meeting turned into a calculated ambush. Wolf was shot 7 times, 5 in the back, 1 in the chest, and 1 under the arm, by Simmons' accomplice and brother-in-law, Timothy Milano. Simmons then held Leeser hostage. He raped her and forced her to watch as he dismembered Wolf's body in a bathtub using butcher knives from his workplace. The remains were later discarded into a nearby swamp infested with alligators. Leeser managed to escape and alerted neighbors, ultimately leading to Simmons' arrest. In August 1997, Simmons was convicted of capital murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including Leeser's testimony, DNA, forensic tools from his home, and statements from Milano, who received life without parole. The jury took just 90 minutes to recommend a death sentence, citing aggravating factors such as extreme cruelty and future danger. In his last meal before execution, Simmons ordered what is considered the most caloric final meal ever recorded in the United States, totaling nearly 29,000 calories. It included 2 Pizza Hut Super Supreme pizzas, McDonald's fries, strawberry ice cream, several milkshakes, and sodas. He declined sedatives and maintained a defiant tone, reportedly saying, "I've tried everything except a bag of chips." On June 20, 2012, at 6 p.m., Simmons was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. His last words were, "I've been blessed to be loved by some good people, by some amazing people. I thank them for their support. Now let's get on with it so these people can go home. That's it." He was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. at age 49. Jeffrey Wolf's father attended the execution and reportedly said, "You'll burn in hell." Charlene Leeser did not attend, but her courtroom testimony was instrumental in securing Simmons' conviction. Samuel Villegas Lopez, State, Arizona. On October 29, 1986, 24-year-old Samuel Villegas Lopez broke into the Phoenix apartment of 59-year-old seamstress Estefana Holmes. Inside, he brutally attacked her, raping her, binding her with her own clothing, and stabbing her 23 times in the chest and abdomen. He slashed her throat with one of her kitchen knives. The scene showed signs of a prolonged struggle, with blood found in nearly every room. Lopez was arrested days later while being questioned for an unrelated assault. In 1987, he was tried and sentenced to death. His court-appointed lawyer, with no experience in capital cases, called no witnesses and failed to present any mitigating evidence. The judge imposed the death sentence, citing the extreme cruelty of the crime. Lopez spent 25 years on death row, filing numerous appeals. His attorneys argued ineffective counsel and the unfair application of sentencing reforms. All appeals were denied. On June 26, 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer and the State Clemency Board also denied his request for commutation. In his last meal before execution, Lopez requested red and green chili beef, rice, avocado, French fries, vanilla ice cream, and pineapple. When asked if he wanted to say any final words, he replied, "No, I don't want to." Samuel Villegas Lopez was executed by lethal injection on June 27, 2012, at Florence State Prison. He was pronounced dead at 10:37 a.m., 29 minutes after the procedure began. He was 49 years old. Yokamon Hearn, State, Texas. On March 26, 1998, 19-year-old Yokamon Hearn and 3 accomplices forced 23-year-old stockbroker Frank Messier into his own car while he was washing it at a Dallas car wash. Armed with 9mm and .22 caliber pistols, they drove him to a remote area. Hearn fired 6 of the 12 shots that killed Messier, hitting his head and torso. Messier's car was found abandoned in a parking lot with the lights on and trunk open. Security camera footage led to the arrest of Hearn and his accomplices. Items belonging to Messier were found with a friend of Hearn, Aaron Runnels. In December 1998, Hearn was convicted of capital murder by a jury that deliberated for only 50 minutes. Among his accomplices, Delvin Dials pleaded guilty to capital murder and received life imprisonment. Dwight Burley and Teresa Shirley were convicted of aggravated robbery and released in 2008 after serving 10 years. On July 18, 2012, Texas executed Hearn by lethal injection using pentobarbital, the state's first execution with this single drug protocol. The procedure lasted 25 minutes without visible complications, although the change raised concerns about potential prolonged suffering. Hearn's last meal was the standard menu, as Texas abolished special last meal requests in 2011. His final words were, "I want to tell my family I love them and wish them the best. I'm ready." Marvin Lee Wilson. State, Texas. On November 4, 1992, police raided Marvin Lee Wilson's apartment in Beaumont, Texas, after a tip from 21-year-old informant Jerry Robert Williams. They seized 24 grams of cocaine, leading to Wilson's arrest along with his accomplice, Vincent Webb. Wilson was released on bail but vowed revenge against Williams, accusing him of betrayal. 5 days later, on November 9, 1992, Wilson and Andrew Lewis confronted Williams outside a convenience store. Witnesses said Wilson beat Williams, kidnapped him, and drove him to a remote area where he shot Williams 6 times in the head and neck. The body was left at a bus stop and found the next day. In 1994, a jury convicted Wilson of capital murder based on witness testimony and physical evidence. His criminal record, including 2 robbery convictions, and the premeditated nature of the crime led to an automatic death sentence under Texas law. Wilson's case sparked national controversy due to his intellectual disability. In 2004, a court-appointed neuropsychologist measured his IQ at 61, well below the 70-point threshold typically defining intellectual disability. Despite this, Texas applied the Bresenio factors, subjective criteria including his ability to plan the crime, to deny his disability claim. On August 7, 2012, Wilson was executed by lethal injection of pentobarbital at Huntsville State Prison. He died 14 minutes after the injection began. His last words, addressed to his family, were, "I came here a sinner and I leave a saint. Take me home, Jesus. I love you all. I'm ready." Daniel Wayne Cook. State, Arizona. In July 1987, Daniel Wayne Cook and his roommate John Matsky planned to rob a co-worker, Carlos Cruz Ramos, in Lake Havasu City. After taking some money, a confrontation led to a violent attack. Cook inflicted serious physical harm on Cruz Ramos over several hours, which resulted in his death. Later, 16-year-old Kevin Swanee arrived at the scene, and Cook and Matsky also attacked and killed him. Matsky surrendered to police and confessed, receiving a reduced sentence. Cook was arrested shortly after and admitted that the situation got out of control. In 1988, Cook chose to represent himself at trial. The court denied his request for a mental health expert during sentencing, and no mitigating evidence was presented. He was convicted and sentenced to death based on the severity of the crimes. Later, evidence showed Cook had a history of severe childhood abuse and mental health issues. The lead prosecutor later said that, had this been known, the death penalty might not have been pursued. Cook's appeals were denied by the courts, and the governor did not intervene. On August 8, 2012, Cook was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison. The process lasted about 40 minutes without visible problems. For his last meal, Cook requested eggplant lasagna, garlic mashed potatoes with cheese, roasted Brussels sprouts, braised asparagus, ice cream, and root beer. Arizona eliminated special last meals after Cook's extravagant request, switching to standard meal options. His execution was among the last before the state temporarily suspended the death penalty due to drug protocol controversies. His last words were, "I want to apologize to the victims' families. I know it's not enough. Where am I? To my lawyers, thank you. Red Robin, yum, I'm done. I love you all. Michael Edward Hooper, State, Oklahoma." On December 7, 1993, Michael Edward Hooper murdered his ex-partner Cynthia Lynn Jarman, 23, and her two children, Tanya, 5, and Timmy, 3, near Oklahoma City. The case was rooted in a history of domestic violence and threats. Hooper and Jarman had a tumultuous relationship starting in 1992, marked by physical abuse and mutual restraining orders. After Jarman moved with her children to a friend's house to avoid Hooper, he kidnapped them. Hooper shot each victim twice in the head with a 9mm handgun and buried their bodies in a shallow grave. The remains were found 3 days later. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as close-range gunshot wounds. In 1995, Hooper was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The prosecution highlighted his violent history and premeditation, as Hooper purchased the gun hours before the murders. Hooper declined to seek clemency. The U.S. Supreme Court denied a stay of execution just hours before his death. His last meal included cranberry juice, coffee, fresh berries, peach, apricot, plum, pear, apple, banana, and orange. Hooper was executed by lethal injection on August 14, 2012, at McAlester State Prison. The process began at 6 p.m. and ended at 6:14 p.m. with no visible complications. His last words were, "I give thanks to God for this lavish farewell. I ask that my spirit be delivered straight to Jesus. I am ready. I love you all." Donald L. Palmer, State, Ohio. On May 8, 1989, Donald L. Palmer, age 24, and his accomplice Edward Hill were near Mount Pleasant, Ohio, when they encountered Charles W. Speenholtz, 43. After colliding with Speenholtz's truck, Palmer shot him twice in the head. Minutes later, Stephen R. Vargo, 41, stopped to help, and Palmer shot him twice in the head as well. The bodies were left in a field and on the roadside. Palmer was arrested hours later and confessed, claiming the gun fired accidentally during a fight with Speenholtz. Ballistics and witness testimony proved he manually fired the gun each time, showing premeditation. In October 1989, a Belmont County jury found Palmer guilty of aggravated murder and aggravated robbery, sentencing him to death. Palmer spent 23 years appealing, arguing ineffective defense and procedural errors. In 2009, federal appeals rejected his habeas corpus petition, calling the evidence overwhelming and the trial fair. His lawyers tried unsuccessfully to introduce his traumatic childhood, including his mother's drug addiction and his early drug use. Palmer's last meal included a ham and Velveeta cheese sandwich, ranch-flavored Doritos, peanut M&Ms, hazelnut ice cream, cheesecake, and soda. He was executed by lethal injection on September 20, 2012, at Lucasville State Prison. The procedure started at 10 a.m. and ended at 10:35 a.m. without visible complications. Palmer's last words, addressed to 6 women related to the victims, were, "I've carried you in my heart for years. I deeply regret what I took from you. I hope your pain dies with me today." Victims' family members like Tiffany Namath, widow of Speenholtz, rejected his apology, saying, "What good is saying sorry after killing someone?" Palmer's accomplice, Edward Hill, has been serving life imprisonment since 1989. Robert Wayne Harris, State, Texas. On March 20, 2000, Robert Wayne Harris, age 28, returned to the Métis Fine car wash in Irving, Texas, 5 days after being fired. Armed with a 9mm pistol, He ordered 6 employees to lie on the floor, then shot each of them in the head during a robbery. 5 died instantly. He was arrested the same day and confessed. In October 2000, a Dallas County jury convicted him of capital murder. The prosecution emphasized his violent history and premeditation. He had purchased the gun just hours before. The jury sentenced him to death after only 15 minutes of deliberation. Harris appealed, citing intellectual disability. His IQ was reportedly 68, and racial bias in jury selection. Courts rejected the disability claim, citing inconsistent testing and his ability to plan complex crimes. Claim he was executed by lethal injection that same day at the Huntsville unit. The process began at 6:22 p.m. and ended at 6:43 p.m. He was 40 years old. His last words were, "I'm going home. Don't worry about me, I'll be okay. God bless, and the Texas Rangers, the Texas Rangers." Cleve Foster, State, Texas. On February 14, 2002, Cleve Foster, then 38, and his roommate Sheldon Ward met 30-year-old Nyanur Mary Powell, a Sudanese immigrant, at a bar in Fort Worth, Texas. Later that night, they took her to a wooded area where she was sexually assaulted and shot in the head. Her body was left in a ditch. DNA evidence linked both men to the crime. Although Ward later claimed sole responsibility in a written statement before dying of cancer in 2010, forensic inconsistencies contradicted his confession. Under Texas's law of parties, Foster was sentenced to death as a Foster's case gained attention for multiple last-minute stays. In 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court delayed his execution 3 times. He was executed by lethal injection on September 25, 2012, at the Huntsville unit. The process began at 6:18 p.m. and lasted approximately 25 minutes. Foster was 48 years old. His final words were addressed to the victims' families and his loved ones. "When I close my eyes, I'll be with the Father. God is everything. I pray we'll meet in heaven." Jonathan Marcus Green, State, Texas. On June 21, 2000, 30-year-old Jonathan Green abducted 12-year-old Christina Neal while she was walking near her home in Dobbin, Montgomery County, Texas. A month later, on July 19th, investigators found her decomposed body wrapped in a plastic bag and hidden behind a couch in Green's house, located just across the highway from the Neal residence. Forensic evidence confirmed she had been raped and strangled. Green had lured Christina to his property, murdered her, buried the body in a shallow grave, and later exhumed it in an attempt to conceal the crime. His erratic behavior, inconsistent alibis, and suspicious actions like burning trash shortly after her disappearance led to the search warrant that uncovered the remains. In 2002, a jury in Montgomery County convicted Green of capital murder. Prosecutors presented his violent history, including past assaults and threats with firearms. The jury sentenced him to death, citing his future danger to society. Green's appeals focused on mental health claims. His defense argued he suffered from schizophrenia, exhibited paranoid delusions, and believed in prison conspiracies. They also claimed he was intellectually disabled, with a reported IQ of 68, illiteracy, and poor adaptive functioning. However, Green refused psychological testing, weakening the defense. Courts ultimately ruled he was competent for execution. He was executed by lethal injection on October 11, 2012, at the Huntsville unit. He was 44 years old. The procedure began at 10:27 p.m., and he was pronounced dead 18 minutes later. His final words were, "I'm an innocent man. I never killed anyone. Y'all are killing an innocent man. It's hurting me bad." Eric Donald Robert, State, South Dakota. On April 12, 2011, 48-year-old Eric Donald Robert attempted a violent prison escape that led to the murder of correctional officer Ronald R.J. Johnson at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls. Robert, already serving an 80-year sentence for kidnapping, attacked Johnson with a metal pipe and suffocated him with plastic wrap inside the prison's industrial shop. Alongside fellow inmate Rodney Burgett, Robert tried to escape by disguising himself in the officer's uniform and pushing Burgett inside a large rolling cart. The plan failed when guards stopped them at the exit and quickly realized something was wrong. Both men were subdued and arrested. Robert later admitted full responsibility. In October 2011, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and waived his right to a jury trial. He told the judge, "If I'm not sentenced to death, I will kill again." The court agreed, citing the exceptional depravity of the murder, and sentenced him to death. Robert refused to file appeals. He pushed for a swift execution, saying justice would only be served by his death. In his final hours, Robert declined any special last meal. Instead, he requested only Moose Tracks ice cream, vanilla with fudge and caramel, which he ate 40 hours before the execution. He then began a fast, saying it was symbolic of Jesus' 40-hour fast before resurrection. He was executed by lethal injection of pentobarbital on October 15, 2012, at the state penitentiary in Sioux Falls. He was 50 years old. Before the injection began, Robert spoke calmly and clearly. "In the name of justice and liberty and mercy, I authorize and forgive Warden Douglas Weber to execute me for my crimes. It is done." He was pronounced dead at 10:24 p.m. The entire process took 24 minutes. Witnesses reported that Robert gasped and snored before falling silent. Bobby Lee Hines, State, Texas. On October 20th, 1991, 19-year-old Bobby Lee Hines broke into the apartment of 26-year-old Michelle Wendy Haupt in Carrollton, Texas. Using a master key stolen from the building's maintenance man, Hines entered her unit to commit robbery. But when Haupt resisted, he attacked her with a stereo cord and an ice pick, stabbing her 18 times and strangling her to death. Hines lived temporarily in the same complex. His face and neck bore visible scratch marks from Haupt's struggle. Police found a charm from her necklace in his pocket, and his fingerprints at the scene sealed the case. On October 24, 2012, Bobby Lee Hines was executed by lethal injection of pentobarbital at the Huntsville unit. He was 40 years old. In his final statement, Hines addressed the victim's family. "I know I took someone special from you. I know it was wrong. I wish I could give back what you lost, but I can't. I wish there was something I could do." The execution began at 6 p.m. and ended at 6:28 p.m. Michelle Haupt's father, present at the execution, said justice was finally served, though 21 years too late. Donald Eugene Muller, State, South Dakota. On May 8, 1990, 38-year-old Donald Eugene Muller abducted 9-year-old Becky O'Connell as she walked to a nearby store in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to buy sugar for lemonade. The next day, her body was found in a wooded area near the Big Sioux River. She had been raped, stabbed multiple times, and her throat was slashed. The investigation lasted 9 months. Witnesses placed Muller near the crime scene, and DNA evidence confirmed his involvement. He had a prior record of sexual assaults. In 1992, Muller was convicted of rape and murder and sentenced to death. Over the following years, Muller filed numerous appeals, including claims of ineffective counsel and intellectual disability, but all were denied by state and federal courts. In July 2012, he told a federal judge, "I killed. I deserve to die." On the evening of October 30th, 2012, Donald Eugene Muller ate his last meal at 5 p.m. scrambled eggs, sausage, tater tots, and coffee. Though South Dakota did not allow special menus, the prison honored his request. He was executed by lethal injection of pentobarbital at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls. When asked if he had any final words, Moeller replied, "No, sir." Seconds later, he turned his head and asked, "Are those my fan club?" A remark apparently aimed at shouting inmates nearby. He was pronounced dead at 10:24 p.m. He was 60 years old. Donnie Lee Roberts Jr., State, Texas. On October 15, 2003, 32-year-old Donnie Lee Roberts Jr. shot and killed his girlfriend, 44-year-old Vicki Bowen, in her home in Lake Livingston, Texas. Roberts, who was staying at her house, demanded money to buy crack. When she refused, he shot her twice in the head, covered her body with a blanket, and stole several items including a television, jewelry, football tickets, and her son's truck. He sold the stolen items to fund his drug habit. Forensic evidence, including blood spatter, fingerprints, and a discarded .22 caliber gun, linked him to the crime. He was arrested hours later driving Bowen's truck, carrying one of her checks. In 2004, a jury in Polk County convicted Roberts of capital murder. The prosecution emphasized his past criminal record and drug use as signs of future danger. Though he claimed the shooting was accidental during a fight, his initial confession and physical evidence led to a death sentence. The sentencing phase lasted just 1 day. The defense failed to present expert testimony on Roberts' childhood, marked by neglect, physical abuse, and family alcoholism, or on the effects of his crack addiction on his behavior. He appealed on grounds of ineffective legal defense and false testimony from a prosecution expert, but courts at both the state and federal levels rejected his claims. In October 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case, and the Texas Board of Pardons denied clemency. At his execution on October 31, 2012, at the Huntsville unit, Roberts addressed Bowen's father, "I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused. I loved your daughter, and I hope God lets me apologize to her in heaven." The lethal injection began at 6:16 p.m. He gasped briefly and was pronounced dead at 6:39 p.m. He was 41 years old. Garry Thomas Allen. State, Oklahoma. On November 21, 1986, 30-year-old Garry Thomas Allen shot and killed his ex-girlfriend, Lawana Gale Titsworth, outside a child daycare center in Oklahoma City. The two had recently separated, and Titsworth, mother of their 2 sons, had moved into a shelter for abused women. That day, Allen confronted her while she was picking up the children. He shot her once in the chest, then returned moments later to fire 3 more times into her back as she begged for her life. Witnesses, including daycare employees, saw the attack. As police responded, Allen struggled with an officer in an alley and attempted to grab the officer's weapon. He was shot in the face, leaving him blind in one eye, partially deaf, and with permanent brain damage. Initially ruled incompetent to stand trial, Allen was treated with antipsychotics and declared competent in 1987. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in 1991 and was sentenced to death by a judge. On November 6, 2012, Garry Allen was executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. His last meal was a meat lover's pizza and a Pepsi. When asked for final words, Allen rambled incoherently, referencing the presidential election. Obama won 2 of 3 counties. It's going to be a real tight race, and mentioned Jesus. The lethal injection began at 6:07 p.m., and he was pronounced dead at 6:10 p.m. He was 56 years old. Mario Rashad Swain. State, Texas. On December 27, 2002, 23-year-old Mario Rashad Swain broke into the home of Lola Nixon, 44, in Longview, Texas. Using his grandfather's truck, Swain forced open the back door. When Nixon caught him, he attacked her brutally, beating her repeatedly with a lug wrench, stabbing her, and strangling her to death. He then placed her body in the trunk of her BMW and moved it to an abandoned vehicle near the local airport. Friends reported Nixon missing after she failed to show up for dinner. Police found blood inside her home and signs of forced entry. A neighbor reported a suspicious truck linked to Swain through his grandfather. During interrogation, Swain confessed and led officers to Nixon's body and to where he had discarded the murder weapon. On November 8, 2012, Mario Rashad Swain was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Penitentiary. Texas no longer allowed special last meals, so he received the standard meal. When asked for final words, Swain shook his head, closed his eyes, and only made barely audible breaths. The execution began at 6:09 p.m. and ended at 6:39 p.m. without complications. No family members of Nixon or Swain attended. Nixon's widow called the execution a life for a life, but criticized the decade-long delay in justice. Brett Xavier Hartman, State, Ohio. On September 9, 1997, 23-year-old Brett Xavier Hartman's life took a dark turn when Wynda Snipes, 46, was found brutally murdered in her Akron apartment. She had been stabbed 138 times, her throat deeply cut, and her hands amputated. The scene showed signs of a violent struggle, including stockings used to tie her ankles to the bed. Hartman, who had been with Snipes earlier that night, claimed he discovered her body and attempted to clean the scene before anonymously calling the police. Hartman made multiple anonymous 911 calls, guiding police to the crime scene. A fellow inmate, Brian Tyson, later testified that Hartman spoke of using a hacksaw during the crime, calling it indispensable. Hartman requested DNA testing on unexamined items like a watch and mop handle, but courts denied the request, relying on existing evidence. In 1998, a Summit County jury convicted Hartman of aggravated murder with kidnapping and evidence tampering. His defense was criticized for presenting only 2 witnesses and omitting a psychological report detailing his traumatic childhood, marked by family alcoholism, substance abuse, and possible abuse. On November 13, 2012, Brett Hartman was executed by lethal injection at Lucasville State Prison. For his last meal, he requested steak with sautéed mushrooms, fried shrimp, baked potato, macaroni and cheese, vanilla ice cream with nuts, and soda. His final words addressed to his family were, "I'm good, let's roll." The execution began at 10 a.m. and ended at 10:34 a.m. Hartman appeared calm, smiling, and giving a thumbs up to his sister before losing consciousness. Ramon T. Hernandez, State, Texas. In 2001, 41-year-old Ramon Torres Hernandez, known as El Razor, kidnapped, raped, and murdered Rosa Maria Rosado, 37, in San Antonio, Texas. Along with his pregnant girlfriend Aisel Abdigaparova and accomplice Santos Minjares, Hernandez abducted Rosado from a bus stop. When she resisted handing over her purse, they forced her into a vehicle, gagged her, and took her to a motel where she was raped and killed. Her body was buried in a shallow grave using a shovel bought at Walmart by Abdigaparova. Hernandez had a violent criminal history including burglary and rape convictions from 1993, serving 18 years before being released on parole that same year. During his time in prison, he attempted an escape by cutting a hole in his cell wall. DNA evidence connected Hernandez to the 1994 murders of Sarah Beth Gonzalez and Priscilla Almaraz, both young girls who were raped and killed. He was also a suspect in the disappearance of 2 other teenage girls that year. Hernandez was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville State Prison on November 14, 2012. The process began at 6:12 p.m. and ended 26 minutes later without complications. His last words, addressed to his brother and the victims' families, were, "Did I ever tell you you have Dad's eyes? I have noticed that in the last couple of days. I'm sorry for putting you through all of this. Tell everyone I love them. It was good seeing the kids. I love them all. Tell Mom, everybody, I am very sorry for all the pain." He also urged other death row inmates to keep fighting, don't give up. Preston Hughes III. State, Texas. In 1988, 22-year-old Preston Hughes III was linked to the brutal stabbing murders of 15-year-old Chandra Charles and her 3-year-old cousin Marcel Taylor in Houston, Texas. On September 26th, both victims were found stabbed in a vacant lot near an apartment complex. Chandra, still alive when found, identified her attacker as Preston and said, "He tried to rape me before dying." Marcel had been stabbed through the neck. Police found Hughes, the only resident named Preston in the area, wearing blood-stained clothes and carrying a knife. Hughes initially confessed, but later retracted, claiming the blood came from a rabbit he had hunted. No DNA directly linked him to the crime. In 1989, Hughes was convicted of capital murder based largely on his initial confession, police testimony, and his prior history of sexual assault on a minor in 1987. The prosecution emphasized the cruelty of the crime. The defense failed to present evidence of childhood sexual abuse Hughes suffered, a key mitigating factor. On November 15, 2012, Hughes was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville State Prison. The process lasted 15 minutes. His mother, present at the execution, shouted, "My baby, I haven't touched my son in 23 years." His last words were, "You know I'm innocent and I love you all. Keep fighting for my innocence." He was pronounced dead at 7:52 p.m. George T. Ochoa, State, Oklahoma. In 1993, 28-year-old George T. Ochoa and his accomplice Osvaldo Torres broke into the home of Francisco Morales and Maria Yanez in Oklahoma City. In the early hours of July 12th, they entered the victim's bedroom and fired 23 shots. Morales was hit 12 times, Yanez 11. Their children, aged 14 and 11, witnessed the attack. The eldest daughter identified Ochoa and Torres, who were arrested nearby minutes later, showing nervousness and sweating excessively. Authorities suggested the crime might have been related to a failed robbery. Ochoa, who had a history of domestic violence and substance abuse, was linked to the murders through circumstantial evidence and the testimony of Yanez's daughter. In March 1996, a jury in Oklahoma County convicted Ochoa of 2 counts of first-degree murder and robbery with burglary. The sentencing phase emphasized his future dangerousness, criminal history, and the risk posed to multiple people, including children present during the crime. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, confirmed by Judge Charles L. Owens. On December 4, 2012, George T. Ochoa was executed by lethal injection at McAlester State Prison. The procedure began at 6:01 p.m. Central Standard Time and lasted 6 minutes. For his last meal, Ochoa requested a meat lover's pizza and a Coca-Cola. Before the injection, he stated simply, "I am innocent." He was pronounced dead at 6:07 p.m. No family members of the victims attended, but activists held a vigil outside the governor's mansion, criticizing the lack of transparency regarding Ochoa's mental health evaluations. Richard Dale Stokely, State, Arizona. On July 8, 1991, 38-year-old Richard Dale Stockley and 19-year-old Randy Braziel abducted 13-year-olds Mandy Myers and Mary Snyder during a 4th of July festival in Elfrida, Cochise County, Arizona. The girls were taken to a remote area where they were assaulted, strangled, and fatally injured. Stockley further desecrated their bodies before disposing of them in a flooded mine shaft. Days later, Brazel confessed to the police in Chandler, leading to the recovery of the bodies. Stockley also admitted involvement, though he later tried to take back his statement. DNA evidence later linked Brazel to the crimes, but he had already secured a plea agreement. In 1992, a Cochise County jury found Stockley guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and inappropriate conduct with a minor. The prosecution highlighted the cruelty and premeditation of the crimes. He was sentenced to death. For his final meal, Stockley requested a porterhouse steak, French fries, fried okra, a salad with blue cheese dressing, cheddar cheese, rolls, fresh fruit, and chocolate ice cream. On December 5, 2012, Richard Dale Stokely was executed by lethal injection at Florence State Prison. Medical staff faced difficulties establishing an IV line, eventually making a surgical incision in a major vein. Just before the drugs were administered, he said, "I wish I could die doing something meaningful. This just seems like a waste." He offered no apology to the families. Patricia Hancock, mother of one victim, called him a coward for not taking responsibility. He was pronounced dead at age 60. Manuel Pardo, State, Florida. On January 22, 1986, 30-year-old Manuel Pardo Jr., a former Sweetwater police officer and ex-Navy veteran, committed his first known murder in Miami. Along with his accomplice, Rolando Garcia, Pardo went to the home of Mario Amador under the pretense of buying drugs. Instead, he fatally shot Amador and his associate, Roberto Alfonso. This marked the beginning of a months-long string of killings that would leave 9 people dead. Between January and April 1986, Pardo targeted individuals he claimed were connected to drug trafficking. His victims included Luis Robledo, Ulpiano Ledo, Michael Milot, Farah Quintero, Sarah Musa, Ramon Alvaro Cruz, and Daisy Ricard. While many had links to the drug trade, some, like Ricard, were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Pardo was arrested on May 7, 1986 in a New York hospital after suffering a gunshot wound during Ricard's killing. Ballistics matched the bullet to the ones found at multiple crime scenes. Police found a disturbing collection of Nazi memorabilia in his home, as well as personal items from the victims, news clippings, and a crime calendar. At his 1988 trial, Pardo confessed to all 9 murders. The jury found him guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and unanimously recommended death. Pardo spent 26 years on death row. His attorneys filed numerous appeals, raising issues about mental health and trial errors, but all were denied. On October 30, 2012, Governor Rick Scott signed the execution warrant. On December 11, 2012, at 7:47 p.m., Manuel Pardo Jr. was executed by lethal injection using pentobarbital at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He was 56 years old. No special last meal was reported. In his final moments, Pardo said, "Airborne forever," in reference to his military service, and added, "I love you, Michi baby," addressing his daughter. Other words were unintelligible. He yawned, closed his eyes, and was pronounced dead after a few minutes. 7 relatives of the victims witnessed the execution behind glass.